Another jam-packed day in the world of the NHL and the fantasy hockey realm means Steele and I are here for another big-time episode. Thank you for joining us for Wednesdays. Kevin Hayes on the move. Alex Newhook, a big price paid by the Montreal Canadiens. What does it all mean for your fantasy squad? Tune in and tap in, and let's get right to it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to your source for fantasy hockey and off-season news. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, joined as always by your co-host, Mr. Steele Roden. I'm your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We have been treated to a very busy and high-paced 48 hours in the NHL world. And while they're not all blockbuster moves, Steele, you can't help but feel that some of these more minor moves are setting up what is sure to be a busy rest of the week. So make sure you continue to make this your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Steele, the Habs pay a high price for Newhook. We'll talk about that, his fantasy value. You know I have some takes on my boy Alex Newhook, who hasn't panned out how I've expected. Kevin Hayes, finally on the move. He's in St. Louis. This made a lot of sense. They pay a sixth, 50% salary retained for Philly. Let's talk about that. And you know you and I have been dancing around it a little bit, but we got to talk about the blue and white. Now, Sheldon Keefe will be back. Auston Matthews rumors about the contract. Willie Nylander could be on the move. What does it mean for their fantasy value? Take it away, my friend, because I like this move for the Habs, but I want to hear your take on it.
Yeah, at first glance, I think when you look at the draft picks, they may have given up a little bit too much. You have a late 2023 first-round pick, which is the 31st overall pick, and a 2023 second-round pick, which is the 37th overall pick, as well as Gianni Fairbrother. So a couple of high draft picks, end of the first round, early second round, going back to the Colorado Avalanche. And the Montreal Canadiens, they acquire a young centerman in Alex Newhook, who was a 16th overall pick in 2019. So just a few years in the league now. He'll be 20. He just turned 22 at the early in January this year. So he's still a young centerman. He's only been in the league for 3 years. I like this trade from the Montreal Canadiens standpoint. Clearly, they had kicked tires on the Pierre-Luc Dubois conversations. Obviously, that was the guy that they were really intrigued by, but they didn't want to give up the professional hockey ready players they have on their roster, which the Winnipeg Jets are looking to get in return, ready now type of players in the NHL. And unfortunately for the Montreal Canadiens, they couldn't match the price that the Kings are matching right now. And we'll get to that maybe when that trade breaks. Whenever it breaks, it should be pretty soon. But
should be.
Yeah, the Montreal Canadiens get a young centerman, and I think this is great for guys like Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, another young guy that they can play with, have speed with. And you're right, it was a fairly disappointing season for Alex Newhook this past year. 30 points in 82 games, barely touched 14 minutes of average ice time. He had an opportunity. For the first few months where, obviously Nazem Kadri, there was a big hole left in that top six, second line center. He had the opportunity. He struggled right off the bat, first 2 months of this past year. Could not get anything going, and they had JT Compher step in and take over, and he was pretty sound and reliable guy for the second line center position. Very disappointing, but I think this is a fresh new start for Alex Newhook, which is already just he's still into his NHL career 3 years in.
Look, the opportunity that was missed out by Newhook can't be ignored. And with Nas out, with Landeskog out, we knew there was going to be minutes for the taking, and he didn't step into that role, which is always kind of one of those things you really want to see with a young player. And I get it that heading into this season, you'll have to be very apprehensive about what you are looking at from Alex Newhook. Obviously, this isn't a draftable guy right now. Keeper dynasty for me, because I love to keep that angle in the back of my mind. At the back end of that draft, though, Steele, in a deep league, I might take a shot on Newhook just because I think by default, he is going to see more minutes. His shots are going to go up. I believe the points go up by default. Caulfield should be healthy. Another year of Nick Suzuki in the mix. Is it Harvey Pinard, who was the young kid from Montreal who
Yes,
came
he
up?
was.
He was also another little speedster. This Montreal team, say what you will, lots of holes at every position, but they're going to be a pesky, fast little team that I won't want to take too much risk on Newhook this year headed in. Yeah. But I do think overall the fantasy value goes up a little bit, but let's just see what he can do now with a change of scenery and realistically, even more opportunity to make a name for himself in his young career.
Yeah, Alex Newhook was, I believe, my last draft pick in our fantasy last year, and I ended up dropping him after a month and a half into the season. He just wasn't producing offensively, and I understand again. I understand the players that he was playing with in Colorado. They are going to get the majority of the ice time. He's only 22 years old, third year in the league. Again, barely scratching. Didn't even hit 14 minutes of average ice time. So I think if you want to take a flyer on him, maybe in the 17th, 18th, 19th round, take a chance because when Cole Caulfield comes back, Nick Suzuki, that could actually be a very, we'll see what the power play looks like. Could be a very special power play in Montreal with a few of those young guys. I'm not sure how it pans out for goals for and the offensive production because, again, like you said, they still have a bunch of holes in their lineup, especially on the blue line. The team's fairly young when you look at the roster, besides a few other guys who have been there for a long time. But I think you're right. I think the fantasy value goes up slightly, and he's going to have way more opportunities to touch the ice.
40, 45 points, maybe even 50 points if he has a really good kind of come-up year. I could see it. He's got the speed. He's a little dude, but I think he's got the speed and the hands to kind of make – he seems like a very Montreal Canadiens player. This seems like a prototypical move from this organization at this point in time, and it makes sense because he is so young in his career. So I actually, from those angles, I like it for the Habs. They pay 2 back end of the draft first-rounders. Those don't always pan out as well, Steele. So it's kind of, I think it's a fair trade for both sides. He is an RFA, which is another interesting wrinkle, but I think they're obviously making this move because they're going to get him under contract. Kevin Hayes, his contract, 50% is going to be retained by the Philadelphia Flyers. He's headed to St. Louis for a 6th-rounder. We'll get to that after the break. We're going to talk about the boys in the blue and white as well. Brad Sherliving confirming Sheldon Keefe is coming back, Steele. What does this mean for the Matthews contract situation? Maybe nothing, but we'll talk about that as well. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bet if your first bet doesn't hit. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Lately, Steele and I, we've been off the bets a little bit, but at FanDuel, you can hammer everything from PGA, MLB, NASCAR, everything. Lately, I've been sprinkling a little bit on that no-run first inning in the MLB, so make sure you check out your chance to snag that no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel, official partner of the MLB. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. And make sure after today's show, check out Locked On's 2023 NHL Mock Draft Special. The local hosts of Locked On NHL channel have made their picks, and hosts Gil Martin and Hadi Kalakesh break down every selection over a 3-day mock draft event. Find the episodes on Locked On NHL's YouTube channel or wherever you get your favorite podcast. And make sure you're tuning in every single day. Hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. We appreciate all that love and support you show us out there. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. We have been talking about many trades over the last couple of days. Of course, obviously, the NHL draft is taking place this weekend in Nashville. Very excited to see how the draft goes and what happens during the draft, trades and contracts and everything in between. But St. Louis and Philadelphia have finally finalized their trade with Kevin Hayes. We've been talking about this the past 2 days. Kevin Hayes will be going to the St. Louis Blues. Philadelphia, on their end, they acquire a 2024 6th-round pick, as well as also retaining 50% of Kevin Hayes' contract, which I believe is at 7.125. So they take half of that. They're paying him half his salary for the next 3 years. Obviously, again, this is just a salary dump, a contract dump for the Philadelphia Flyers to create some cap space. They're going in the direction of the rebuild, it seems like. And the St. Louis Blues acquire a very good veteran centerman who can play on the second or third line.
Hey, shots on net, 209 Steele, lot to like, 23 penalty minutes. Sure, it's not a ton, but he brings some value. The peripherals aren't always the greatest with Kevin Hayes, but I don't think that's why you're necessarily drafting this guy, right? I look at Kevin Hayes as, if you do end up drafting him again, depending on the format, deep drafts, he did have a good year last year. I'm looking at him, Steele, in a lot of the ways that we've talked about a number of these players over the last couple of days, because like we said, it hasn't been the big time swings just yet. We're looking at a lot of these second and third liners. You know, Kevin Hayes, I think, is going to fit in nicely in that bottom six in St. Louis. Also, I don't know if you've seen a lot of these Ryan O'Reilly rumors. It could be a return to St. Louis for Ryan O'Reilly. And I think actually, if that does happen, they're pretty set up the middle in St. Louis. Robert Thomas, Braden Shen, Kevin Hayes, and then you bring back Ryan O'Reilly. Maybe they're a little bit slow-footed, but that's a solid up the middle crew. Kevin Hayes, though, fantasy-wise for me, Steele, I think last year in 81 games, I was pretty impressed given that, you know, he's playing under Torts, he's playing with the Flyers. I think it's proven that he still's got a lot of offensive value. You know, he is 31 years old, so heads up about where you draft him, but I think he's a solid option as an injury fill-in, you know, your last center drafted, or even if it is, you know, more of a shallow draft, keep an eye out for him as an early injury fill-in over the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, you know what? I did see the Ryan O'Reilly rumors about maybe potentially returning back to St. Louis, and where the projections of that contract were at, where I think it was like $4 million at 5.9 or just over $6 million over 4 years. And after making this trade for Kevin Hayes, I just don't see that happening. I think it's very unlikely because they have just under $4 million in cap space. They would have to obviously move, if they could move Torrey Krug's contract, maybe move a couple of first or a couple of picks to get that contract moved as well. They might have to do that to get a return for Ryan O'Reilly, but the cap space for a few teams this offseason is going to be very, very capped off, should I say. So St. Louis, they trade for Kevin Hayes. I completely agree with you. I don't know about his fantasy value per se, just because when you look at Philadelphia, he was the first line centerman. Right. He was on the top line. If he falls down to that, bottom six group and he plays center for the third line, I just don't realistically see how his offensive production could increase or even stay the same. Point. Again, it's a new place, a new team that he's playing for. He's got to create those bonds and those chemistries with his teammates. But if he's playing on the third line center, he can still bring some value. I just don't know how much.
Definitely, Steele. And that is one of those things that I think you and I mentioned a lot about in the September couple of weeks of episodes, is keep your eyes peeled for the lineup projection. See where coaches are trying to run out these new additions. Is it mean if Kevin Hayes is on the top line in preseason and games like that, he's going to play in the top line? Absolutely not. But it might be more indicative of where they might be headed, and also pay attention to what other moves these teams make. Because obviously, if Ryan O'Reilly does come in, then bump Kevin Hayes' value down even more, because I assume his minutes get eaten into even more. But at the end of the day, Steele, this is the moves, some of these moves that are making sense, right? They're all kind of, we saw this coming. This one makes sense. The Newhook one didn't make as much sense. But I think as we continue to push towards July 1st, and we only have a couple of days left, we're going to see some much bigger names come off the board, because no disrespect to Kevin Hayes, but, his best days are likely behind him. Solid year this year, but again, probably inflated by playing with some of those good young players on the top line in Philly. But still, back into your draft, maybe a first week flyer or a really, really deep draft at the very last, 2 rounds, I'm okay with taking Kevin Hayes.
I'm okay with that as well. And you're right. There are a few big names still out there ready to be moved. Pierre-Luc Dubois being one of them. Very, very close to a sign and trade with the LA Kings. We know that Barry Trotz has, a barrel in the chamber right now. He's got a big move up his sleeve that he could potentially have as well. Yes, so we're keeping our eyes on Nashville. We're keeping our eyes on Winnipeg. And, of course, a few other teams that have some big names on the trade block, of course. One of them may be William Nylander. We will have to get to that very, very shortly. We want to talk about Sheldon Keefe. Looks like he will be back next season with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Contracts with William Nylander and Auston Matthews have been underway. We'll talk about that as well very, very shortly. But thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all that love and support. We're so close to 850 subscribers, trying to get to 1,000 before next season. Help us get there. We love all that support and all that love out there. So thank you so much for that. And we love our Toronto Maple Leafs. So this is a big news for us. We haven't really talked about the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Love's a strong word, isn't it?
A ton. It is a very strong word, but we have a deep connection and deep love for this blue and white team based in Toronto. So we love them. It's been a difficult road over the last few years, but nonetheless, news has been starting to trickle out a little bit. Brad Treliving and Sheldon Keefe been talking. He's been trying to form those bonds, those relationships with his new organization.
Right.
But Sheldon Keefe, it looks like he will be the head coach for the Toronto Maple Leafs next season.
Yeah, and shout out to our good friend of the show of Sportsnet, Michael Amato. Good tweet today from our friend Amato saying that he's unsure if any other Major 4 sports league would allow a coach in 5 seasons to have home ice advantage and be the favorites in 5 series and to only win one of them. But it feels like the right move is what Amato's saying. And I agree. I don't think what's been, haunting this team is not Sheldon Keefe's fault. I actually like this move, Steele. I think getting rid of Dubas was tough. Should it have been Brandon Shanahan and more of a full front office shakeup? I don't know. That's above my pay grade, but I do know this. The Leafs that are in there, it's on the players to pull their heads out of their you-know-whats. Play when you need to play the most. This is professional hockey. You're getting paid a lot of money. Perform when you need to perform. And we're not here to talk about the same things that we've talked about in and out with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think the move here with Keefe is the right one. Yeah. And more importantly, Steele, I think this is Treliving getting the small business out of the way first. Sheldon Keefe, we had to get all the coaching rumors. Let's get that done. And now let's get Auston Matthews in here and under contract, because I'll say this and turn it back over to you. Whatever you want to say about Auston Matthews and his inabilities or abilities, if the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win with any semblance of this current roster, Auston Matthews needs to be right at the head of it, and he needs to lead the team all season long, from October till hopefully June.
I completely agree as well. It's on the players at this point. And I like the fact that they're going back to Sheldon Keefe. He deserves the opportunity to run it back with this group, or at least be the guy at the helm, the guy with the wheel leading this group behind the bench. And he's done a fantastic job so far. 4 years in the NHL as a head coach. Every single year so far, he's finished top 3 in his division. He's made the playoffs every year. His point percentage has never been below a .625 point percentage in the regular season. So he's firing on all cylinders. His coaching record, 166 wins, 71 losses, and 30 overtime losses. He has a great winning record. But when you get to the playoffs, the win percentage is dog water. It's terrible. Yeah. It's below 4. It's pretty much below 450 in every single. Obviously, we know that they've only won one round so far. But at that point in the season, you're in the playoffs. You need your players to show up. And every single season so far, the players usually and typically have not shown up. So again, it falls on the shoulders of those top 4 core guys, top 5 if you want to throw Morgan Riley in there as well.
Yeah,
I completely agree that it falls on the shoulders of guys like Auston Matthews, William Nylander, and Mitch Marner.
And here it is, Steele. And this is the other news that we'll touch on quickly. We're keeping the summer episodes short and sweet, but make sure that you are tapped in all summer long, because Steele and I are going to have all the projections, lists, breakdowns, top wingers, top forwards, D, and goalies, so that you're ready to dominate next year's draft. Auston Matthews projected, Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet, 4 to 5 year deal worth around $13 million per. That makes sense to me, Steele. Again, last year, 40 goals, 45 assists, 85 points for Auston. Were we expecting more? I think so, but that's only because there's only a handful of guys that can bring it like him. When the bar is raised that high, That's my expectations. And he is a 50 goal scorer. He's proven it. 50 goal scorers, there's 3 of them in the NHL that are that consistent, in my opinion. Ovi, McDavid, and Matthews. Yeah, you can make some arguments about a couple of other guys, but that's where it's at for me. So he earns that 13 mil. I have no problem paying him that money. Of course, would I want to sign him to a longer term deal because that's how good I think he is?
Yeah.
But I'm fine with 4 or 5 years because he also deserves to have another shot at another part of his career. In my opinion, if the Leafs can't get it done in 4 to 5 years, if they haven't at least gone to a cup in the next 4 to 5 years, Steele, I hope you and I are still at least friends in 4 to 5 years because I might be taking a break. But that contract makes sense to me, but it might be Willie on his way out.
It looks to be that way because 4 years, 13 million. I don't know the exact number, exact percentage of that cap or of his contract, what his percentage would be of taking all the cap space. I think it would be at like 15, 18% if that's a $13 million 4-year contract. So might have to play gonna have to figure some things out roster wise. And William Nylander might be that guy. And then on the way out, again, trying to figure out the next contract for Nylander after this season. And it looks like the conversations are starting to pick up a lot more heavily. They're getting into the numbers and the more details of it. And the number that it seems to be falling around is Nylander wants to be around 9 million. The Leafs want him around 8 million. And that could be, just the little push that sends Nylander over the edge that facilitates a potential trade.
And I know Treliving's in here now. And it was Dubas who really went back and forth with Willie on the last round of contract negotiations. One that they ended up paying Willie his money. So I don't really know what that means for this negotiation between the Treliving side and now Willie's camp. But at the end of the day, he also outpaced Matthews with 87 points last year. And you can't ignore, as much as, I'm mentioning the 50 goal scorer group, there's also not that many in the 40 goal scorer group. And I know that was the first time in his career, but I think you and I can both agree that I think he's more pointed in the 35 plus area than the 30 below. He's just that good offensively. And he's just one of the most streaky guys out there, Steele. If he can ever get consistent, and we'll say what you will about the peripherals, they're not there. His go effort, his pick me up is sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, Willie, play with some gusto. But his offense is elite. And would I love to have him back? Yeah, but the Leafs just have too many guys that play the same, and they're running out of money. So Matthews gets the bag. That makes sense. And if it means Willie's on the way out, unfortunately, that's part of the business.
It is part of the business, and that might have to be the move in order to create some more cap space, just to fill in those other holes that they need to address this offseason and for the future. Like you said, they have a few guys on the Marlies and that are NHL ready right now. We saw Matthew Nyes in the playoffs last year. He will be on the roster next year. He could fill in for William Nylander in the top 6 group if that were to happen. So things
we draft Matty Nyes if that happens.
That could happen as well. Potentially going to have to keep your eyes on Matty Nyes if he's in the top 6 group for the Toronto Maple Leafs next year. But again, this is the business. This is what you need to keep your eyes on for fantasy hockey leagues, who's being traded, what their contracts might be like, and who they will be playing with. We'll get all that information to you out this summer, Monday through Friday. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure, again, you're tuning in Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time is when you can find all of our episodes. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your summer bets out there. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.